Hello.
Welcome back to the Space School, otherwise known as PBSW, your favorite hangout place, and today we're back with another Star Wars story. Today we're going to be talking about what would have happened had Luke Skywalker joined the Imperial Academy. He talked about it throughout A New Hope, so what would have happened had he actually joined? Would he have gotten close to his father, or would he have ascended the ranks of the Imperial Navy? Before we begin this video, thank you to Cameron Hall for writing the story. A massive thanks to him and everyone else a part of the Pente Patrol team, as well as our patrons, and also, if you want to learn about our next giveaway, watch to the end of the video and I will tell you all about it. Our story begins one early evening on Tatooine in the year 5 BBY. A barely 15-year-old Luke Skywalker sits at a dinner table with his aunt and his uncle, Owen and Beru Lars. For the time being, it felt like the millionth time since he would be asking Owen to be able to join the Imperial Academy to finally leave this Dust Bowl of Tatooine. Owen, like always, told Luke that there was always more need for him the next season, the need for extra hands to be on deck to help him run the moisture farm. Luke knew that wasn't the case, though Owen had said this every season since he turned 14. At this point, Luke would tell Owen that his friends were leaving for the Imperial Academy, and he wanted to go with them. Owen would shake his head, denying the pleas of Luke Skywalker. He knew he couldn't hang on to the boy forever, but he also knew that the consequences of him joining the Empire would be, well, consequential, though it always didn't seem like that. Owen loved Luke like a son, and he couldn't stand the idea of something happening to Luke if he joined the Empire. Luke rebutted by saying that if he joined the Empire, he would get a sign-up bonus that would have enough credits to hire enough help for the farm. He told Owen that he would send his earnings back to them on Tatooine each year to help them ensure that they were not left short-handed. The Empire would give him food, a place to stay, and even pay for any travel he'd have to do. This was the perfect opportunity. While Beru and Owen did not particularly like the idea of being financially supported by their nephew, they knew that it was common practice for Imperial soldiers and officers to send credits back to their families. So they told Luke to finish his work on the farm, and the two would talk it over, arguing on the matter. After the hours passed, then the days, Luke approached his father in the middle of the day. Behind the two of them were two droids, a WED Treadwell droid and a protocol droid. Owen looked at his nephew, confused. Luke explained that he knew that his uncle hadn't made up his mind, but he had enough credits from the enlisting to pay for these two droids, and they should help suffice for the next season. Owen was irritated that Luke, at only 15, was making such a rash decision, such a rash choice, but he knew it was all good within the heart. Owen didn't much care for the Empire, especially not since the third sister tried to kill Luke a while back, but maybe Luke could be one of the few good souls that were in the Empire. Owen agreed to let Luke leave with Biggs and Tank to join the Imperial Academy, only insisting that for the coming months, Luke helps him prepare for the coming season. As the weeks counted down to the day of his departure, Luke was giddy with excitement. He had never been off-world that he knew of, and he was finally ready to make his dreams come true. Owen, on the other hand, was terrified, not only for Luke's safety, but also for what old Ben would say when he found out. Owen was not keen on telling Obi-Wan about Luke's departure, at least not yet. The day came for Luke to leave the desert planet and travel to the Prefest Academy in the Prefest Belt system. Owen and Beru accompanied Luke to Mos Eisley, where an Imperial shuttle would often pick up new recruits. They said farewell to their still young nephew as he, along with Biggs, Tank, and several others, boarded the Imperial ship. Within minutes, the group was off, leaving their beloved families behind. Over the coming year, Luke would be put through grueling trials and tests, pushing his physical and mental fortitude. In the Imperial Academy, he was allowed less than 5 hours of sleep a night, forced to endure brutal exercise regimens, and was given food that was more bland than that on Tatooine, which even surprised Biggs. Despite this, he kept his spirits high. He was with his friends, and they were doing what was necessary to finally be able to travel the galaxy. Plus, Luke had heard the truly terrible and physical unbearable 2-year Stormtrooper training program. He was just glad he went into the Imperial piloting program instead. During this year, Ben Kenobi, who typically only watched Luke from a distance, came to wonder why he was no longer seeing the boy out and about, working on the farm. After several months of confusion, as well as no longer sensing the presence of the boy through the Force, Kenobi gave a visit to the Lars homestead against Owen's wishes. Here he found a handful more droids than before, as well as faces he did not recognize, employees Owen had hired with the credits sent by Luke. Obi-Wan would say hello to Owen as Owen opened the door. He, as usual, was not too excited to see Obi-Wan, the old wizard from the desert. 5 years prior, Ben's presence had nearly caused the death of the Lars family, and Owen knew just how dangerous it was to have a Jedi lurking around. Beru, on the other hand, was all smiles, telling Kenobi that she had missed him being around and was always welcome in their home. She ushered him inside, offering him a drink and a meal. Ben would look around the homestead, seeing no sign of Luke, and, thank her for the hospitality of Beru and Owen, but then he would ask for Luke, because he had a gift for him. Kenobi reached into his bag and took out a gold medal. His father won the Boon to Eve Classic, and that was almost 30 years ago to the day, and Obi-Wan thought that Luke should have it. Owen rebutted, saying that if Luke was here, he wouldn't have opened the door. Instead, Luke was at the Imperial Academy, and they couldn't keep Luke here forever. Kenobi would be shocked, staring at Owen, wondering how he could just let Luke do such a thing. Of course, they all agreed that training Luke would be very unlikely, at least for a while longer, but Owen knew that Luke was the child of Darth Vader himself. How could he let this boy go and subject him to this, to Vader, to Palpatine, to the dark side? Kenobi began yelling at the two, telling them that they only had been given Luke because they promised to protect him, while Owen and Beru tried to rebuke Ben, telling him that protecting him was letting him make his own mistakes, and they simply couldn't just keep him in hiding his entire life. Kenobi wouldn't accept this. Leaving the Lars homestead, Obi-Wan would make his way to Mos Eisley without a second thought. Here he would find a pilot by the name of Han Solo, a man known for smuggling and piloting skills. While Ben no longer had access to Republic or Jedi credits, he had worked nearly 15 years on Tatooine, spending very little of his money, offering every credit he had left. Ben was able to convince Solo to take him to Alderaan. The young Solo would be in possession of a ship named the Millennium Falcon, but he didn't typically take jobs for a low rate Kenobi was offering. Luckily, he had a shipment of cargo that was needed to pick up from Corellia to deliver to one Bail Organa on Alderaan. He and his Wookiee co-pilot Chewbacca would accept the job under the terms that they make a stop on Han's homeworld first, and the three would immediately depart from Tatooine. En route to Corellia, Han would inquire as to why Kenobi was heading from Tatooine to Alderaan. This wasn't a journey that many people, if any, made. Tatooine was the polar opposite of Alderaan, and most people from the desert could not even imagine the lush green hills and shiny palaces that dotted the landscape of this core world. Ben looked over to Chewbacca, who was staring at him. Ben asked the Wookiee what the Wookiee's name was. Chewbacca was cut off by Han as Han told him that it was Chewbacca. Kenobi smiled because he remembered a name of a Wookiee named Chewbacca, who helped Master Yoda escape Kashyyyk several years ago. Obi-Wan noted that Chewbacca recognized his robes, and Chewie nodded his head, telling Kenobi and Shiri-Wook that he saw two lightsabers dangling from his waist, and when he entered the ship, he noticed them. Kenobi smiled, then Shiri-Wook told Chewbacca that he didn't want the co-pilot to know that he was a Jedi. Ben laughed for a moment, and then he was cut off by Han, who said that he understood what exactly was said by Ben. Ben's face turned pale as he realized that the smuggler could turn him in for a massive profit. Han didn't have the heart to do that. He wouldn't be turning him in. Anyways, Han had a bounty on his head to worry about as it was, so he didn't have to turn somebody else in. Chewbacca and Han chuckled as the group continued through hyperspace en route to Corellia. While on Corellia, Ben hid out in the secret storage compartments of the Falcon. Han and Chewie told him time and time again that their cargo was being picked up from a private dealer, and that he had nothing to worry about. Kenobi, though, was not willing to take the risk. Though they were only on the shipyard planet for a few hours, it felt like years to Ben. He had been hiding for so long, but this was different. He knew that if he was caught, it would be the end of him, and potentially the Jedi. He thought back 6 years beforehand when he was inside of Fortress Inquisitorius, seeing all the Jedi that the Empire had killed. Taris Anube, a youngling of some sorts, and even Coleman Kajak. Obi-Wan was the only hope of the Jedi in the galaxy, and he had to make it to Alderaan to train Leia to make sure that she was never lost, as Luke had been. After loading the cargo and taking off for Alderaan, the tile above Ben's head was removed and pulled out by the compartment by Chewbacca, who then ushered him back to the cockpit of the ship. Upon arrival on Alderaan, Han asked the old man where on the planet he would like to go, and to be dropped off, assuming that Ben was heading to one of the major cities. Obi-Wan told them that he would like to go to the Organa Palace. Han was taken aback. This was where he was headed as well. Without questioning it, he landed the Millennium Falcon on one of the royal docking yards. A 16-year-old Leia ran up to Kenobi, embracing him in a hug. She wasn't sure if he remembered her, but she remembered him, and how he saved her life not even 6 years prior. Kenobi chuckled, holding Leia tightly, as Bail emerged from his palace. saying that he didn't expect to see old Obi-Wan so soon. 6 years obviously wasn't enough. The two chuckled, embraced each other as well, and Kenobi filled in his old friend on everything that had happened with Luke and the Lars. Bail listened for a moment. He had to pause Ben when the cargo had been unloaded from the Millennium Falcon. He approached Han and Chewbacca and handed them a case of credits, thanking them for their service. The smugglers smiled before reboarding their ship and taking off from the sky. Bail and Leia ushered Ben inside, asking him to continue filling them in. On the other side of the galaxy, Luke was excelling in his training, gaining the attention of his superiors. He surpassed the marks of every other student who had come through this academy, including the likes of Wilhoff Tarkin and Rey Salan. He would graduate at the top of his class and was given a choice to where he would like to be deployed next, a very rare opportunity for a 16-year-old boy. Luke chose to be deployed to Lothal. He liked the idea of being near a starship factory, and he was fascinated by the 7th Fleet and the tactics of Admiral Sartan. He also made another odd request, that Biggs and Tank be deployed with him. They had finished as their second and third in the class, still nowhere near Luke though. While the Empire typically frowned upon friendships among their ranks, they granted Luke his request. There had been an increasing amount of rebel activity in the Lothal sector. Having 3 of their best pilots in the Outer Rim station there could help quell these insurgents. Within the week, Luke, Biggs, and Tank deployed to the 7th Fleet. The 3 of them would be stationed on the fleet's flagship, the Chimera, as officers and pilots in training. Here they would observe and learn under the Fleet Admiral Sartan, watching them fight off the rebels of the Phoenix Group. While the 3 would not take their part in any of these battles, they watched as Sartan's forces were unable to hold off the Ghost and continuously let these rebels go. This brought a sense of questioning the Tank and Biggs. They were seeing TIE fighters explode into balls of fire every week, pilots dying, some of whom they came to know very well. For Luke though, this lit a fire in him. He saw a group of insurgents as terrorists, ones who needed to be taken down. He also knew he was the best pilot this fleet had to offer, and he was the only one who could stand a chance against the famous Hera Syndulla. One day in 4 BBY, only months after being deployed in orbit of Lothal, Biggs, Tank, and Luke were met with an uncommon occurrence. The Emperor had sent his apprentice, Darth Vader, to the Lothal sector to help bring an end to these rebels. While Agent Kallus, Minister Lua, and so many others had chased them and tried to capture the Phoenix Group, the Emperor had finally noticed their harm and sent the powerhouse that was Vader to solve the situation. Upon the arrival to the 7th Fleet, alongside Moff Tarkin, Vader felt a presence, one that emanated through the Force and surrounded the ship. He had not felt the presence as strong since the last time he fought his old master, 6 years ago. But this was different. This was not Obi-Wan Kenobi. It was not pure or light. It wasn't one of the Inquisitors either. They had some power, but nothing as strong as this. Vader asked for Agent Kallus, asking if there was a Jedi on board the ship. Agent Kallus told Vader that there was no Jedi whatsoever on the ship. He would bet his life on it. Vader said that they would see about that, as he continued through the hangar bay and to the bridge. As Darth Vader entered the bridge of the ship, he felt the presence in the Force grow. Whoever it was, they were here with him. Vader scanned the bridge, observing each and every person in the large room, attempting to pinpoint the Jedi, or whoever it was. His gaze landed on a young boy, blonde, and standing between a tall man with a mustache and a larger muscular short-haired man. All 3 were dressed in Imperial junior officer uniforms. Vader felt a connection with this boy, and he knew that there was something different about him. He knew that this was no Jedi though, but Vader also knew he was not a Sith. For the time being, Vader would ignore the boy, focusing on the mission at hand, knowing that the crew of the Ghost would be returning to Lothal to help Minister Lua defect to the rebellion. He made his way down to Lothal City. Here, he instructed the Imperial stormtroopers at the hangar bay to rig the shuttle in Bay 23 with explosives. He knew of Lua's intent to leave the Empire with the aid of the rebels. He knew she would be taking that shuttle to meet Moff Tarkin, and he wanted to make an example of her. As night fell, and Agent Kallus and Minister Lua arrived in the hangar bays, the plan that Vader foresaw came to fruition, as the Phoenix Group attempted to take the Minister from the Imperials. Like clockwork, Lua ran into the shuttle first, and it exploded, killing her instantaneously. This would be the perfect opportunity to frame the rebels for the assassination of her and create a fear of them on Lothal. Everything was coming into position, exactly as he predicted. As the rebels fled the scene, with nobody left for them to help escape, Vader continued on his plan, ensuring that the rebels could not escape off-world. Hours later, Vader found the insurgents attempting to escape through a shuttle in the Imperial complex. Within moments, Vader, along with his stormtroopers, opened the hangar door and revealed themselves to the Phoenix group. Even though nobody could see it, he was smiling. He loved killing rebels, and even more so, he loved killing Jedi, of whom 2 stood before him. Vader ignited his blade and swung at the older Jedi, Kanan Jarrus, known to his former self as Caleb Dune, the former Padawan of Depa Billaba. Vader was able to take on these 2 Jedi with ease, especially with the young boy being so weak in the Force at this point. After striking a hit on Kanan, Vader realized that the Gazeb Aurelios and Sabine Wren were trying to shoot at him, the Lasat and Mandalorian members of the group. They'd placed charges on the walker behind him to surprise him. The 2 young Jedi were able to force push him back, and the walkers would fall on top of him. He was impressed, smiling to himself. They thought they killed him. Using only a small fraction of his power, Vader held up the walkers over him and pushed them away. While the rebels were able to escape, Vader pondered his next moves. He knew the rebels wouldn't be able to escape off-world just yet. Not on their own, at least. In the meantime, he ordered Agent Kallus to burn Tarkin Town to the ground. Similar to the Jedi, the rebels felt like this was their cause, their morality, their fight for the people who couldn't fight against the Empire. It was like an itch, something they had to scratch, something they could just simply not help, much like a Jedi. He knew that burning this town of refugees and impoverished people would get under the skin and make the rebels be compassionate and hopeful and maybe cause them to retaliate, playing right into Vader's and the Imperial's hands. While this was happening, Vader thought to himself. He knew he felt a connection to the blonde-haired boy back on the Star Destroyer, but could the presence he felt be the Jedi rebels? The young Ezra Bridger didn't have the light side of the Force aurora of a normal Jedi. At least not that much of it. Could Vader have been thinking way too much into it? It was possible. Maybe he was wrong. It didn't happen often, but it could be. Either way, this was not the time for it. He would see smoke in the distance, billowing from Tarkin Town. Vader was happy, and the rebels would be on their way to get there soon. Vader waited, watching the horizon and monitoring the comms channel. He continued to wait, and wait, and wait. Yet nothing. Then Vader felt a seething rage bore in his gut as he heard a transmission that an Imperial shuttle had been matching transponder codes as the stolen ship was leaving the surface in Sector 4, then again in Sector 9, then again in Sector 11 and 5. This was all wrong. The rebels were getting away, as Vader heard of the ship leaving into the atmosphere of Lothal and then jumped to hyperspace. He slammed his hand on the window and he looked out. He was enraged. He couldn't believe he had made such a miscalculation, unless... Vader made his way back to the 7th Fleet in a fury, searching for the junior officer he saw earlier. As he arrived on the bridge, he saw the boy in the same position he was earlier, flanked on both sides by the same man. Vader ran towards him, using the Force to lunge at Luke and grab him, asking who he was and why he let the rebels escape. How did he infiltrate the Imperial High Command? Luke responded in fear, stuttering, telling Vader in a frightened voice that he was just a pilot from Tatooine. He didn't know what Vader was talking about. Vader could sense the boy that was telling the truth, but he didn't want to believe it. This wasn't adding up. None of it made any sense. Yet, at the same time, the presence of Luke was that of the Force. And now more than ever, he knew it couldn't be the Rebel Jedi, because they were gone. Vader let Luke go, asking for his name and rank. Luke said his name, Luke Skywalker, of the Priestveld Fleet Camp, junior officer in training under Fleet Command Sergeant, as he said, sir. Vader stepped back in shock. He hadn't heard that name in years. Skywalker. Not since the last time he fought with Obi-Wan. Luke opened his mouth, hesitant to speak to the Sith Lord in front of him. Vader saw hesitation, and asked Luke to speak. Luke asked Vader if he could have any chance, an opportunity to fight the rebels and pilot his own ship. Vader nodded, granting his request. He knew the perfect opportunity in which to test the young Skywalker. Vader used his comlink to get into contact with Agent Kallus, telling him to prepare his personal TIE, as well as the Grand Inquisitor's TIE Advanced X-1 starfighter, which was docked, not being used with the 7th Fleet, and to turn on the tracking beam that was placed on the stolen Imperial shuttle. Mere moments later, Vader and Luke would board their individual fighters, taking off and jumping into hyperspace. Tank and Biggs were stationed in their own cockpits of their own TIE fighters, waiting to follow the fleet and Vader in hyperspace. As the two, father and son, though neither of the two of them knew it yet, arrived at the Rebel fleet, they were met with the Ghost, as well as a handful of A-Wing starfighters. Vader chuckled as he blasted through the first few fighters. Vader told Luke to focus on the ship. He would take care of the fighters. As a space battle ensued, Vader was able to take on the handful of A-Wings very easily, as well as land a dozen or so good shots on the Rebel command ship, while Luke trailed the Ghost, landing a few shots and weaving out of the way of incoming fire. Biggs, Tank, and a few other TIE fighters deployed from the Imperial Star Destroyers, covering Luke and Vader's tails and taking down a few other A-Wings themselves. The trio from Tatooine had never felt such a thrill. As the Ghost continued to flee from Luke, Vader whipped around and cut it off. Suddenly, he felt a presence, one unlike he had felt since the Clone Wars. It wasn't Luke, and it wasn't one of the Jedi he had previously faced. It was different. On the Ghost, Ahsoka felt the presence of Vader. She had not felt such a dark presence of a Sith Lord, much less one this strong. At the same time, she and Vader realized who the other was. Vader was her former master, and she was the apprentice. Within moments, the fleet arrived at a hyperspace. Vader told them to cut off the Rebel fleets from jumping into hyperspace, but to hold their fire. He wanted these traitors alive. He continued taking down A-Wings and landing more shots on the command ship, with Luke finding space to land a few hits on the transport. The command ship exploded in a magnificent blaze, killing Commander Sato and the Rebel forces inside. Seeing this, the Ghost crew commanded the remainder of the Rebel fleet to retreat to the rendezvous point while they distracted Vader and Luke. The fleet obeyed the orders, jumping into hyperspace. The Ghost, meanwhile, weaved through the Imperial fleet, setting themselves to get brought into the tractor beam. Hera timing the situation perfectly and jumped into hyperspace at the moment the tractor beam activated, leaving it to lock onto Luke's starfighter. They lost the Rebels once again. Luke being locked onto by the Star Destroyer by the tractor beam was terrifying. He had only met Vader this one time, but he had heard horror stories of the Sith Lord killing those who failed him. Vader liked to make a point out of these killings, and Luke had a feeling that he was next. On the bridge, Vader walked in only a few moments after Luke. The young Skywalker tensed up, hoping that Vader would show him mercy. Vader, though, walked right past the boy, approaching the deck officer instead. In one swift move, Vader held out his hand and used the Force to snap the officer's neck. The man fell to the floor lifelessly, as the rest of the crew just continued their work, thinking nothing of it. Vader then turned and approached Luke, sensing the fear of the boy. Vader stood in front of Luke, towering over the boy that he knew he had to be related to. He didn't yet make the connection that he could be his own son. Palpatine told him that Padme had died before Padme gave birth, but could it be his nephew? Either way, this boy was strong in the Force, and Vader knew it. He held out his hand, and Luke took hold of it. The two shook hands. Vader complimented Luke on being such a strong pilot, and he was going to promote him to captain, and he also told Luke not to regret it. Vader instructed one of the officers to get Luke a new uniform, one with a Navy captain badge on it. The boy was to be promoted and given the former Grand Inquisitor's TIE Advanced 1 starfighter. Vader knew he had the potential, and he wanted to keep his eye on young Skywalker. Over the coming weeks, Vader would leave the 7th Fleet, and Luke would take his role nicely. While they wouldn't have encounters from the Rebel forces for a while longer, Luke would ensue a tight grip on the blockade of Lothal, having confidence in their ability to hold the planet's factories and resource collections. With this, he would promote Biggs and Tank, giving them the title of Ensign, and finally allowing the opportunity to pilot their TIE fighters. Even on this occasion, letting the Droid ride in his TIE Advanced 1 when Vader and Sartin weren't around. With this, Luke was given pay raise. It wasn't significant, but it gave him the ability to send more money to Beru and Owen on Tatooine. Soon, they would be able to move to Mos Espa or Mos Eisley and live in semi-comfortable conditions. Maybe Owen could even buy a cantina like he'd always dreamed about. On Alderaan, Ben Kenobi was able to convince Bail Organa to let him train teenage Leia. While Bail would request that Kenobi not tell her about her parents just yet, he agreed to let him train the girl. He knew the Empire was growing in power, and with Luke joining the Imperial ranks, Leia could be the only true beacon of hope for the failing rebellion. Leia was quick to take to the Force. She was, after all, the daughter of Anakin. Within weeks of the start of her training, she was able to lift large rocks. She even had a decent connection to the Force itself. Being one for adventure, Having run through the forests of Alderaan since she was a child, she also quickly took to using the Force to propel herself forward, running through the trees and jumping over large rocks, fallen logs, and even down large cliffs. Kenobi was proud of the girl. She had spirit of her mother, and the determination and curiosity of her father. After several months of training in the Force, teaching Leia how to meditate and use the Force to her advantage, Kenobi realized that something was holding her back: the truth. Every few days she would ask the old man about her parents. He had told her a very small bit about her mother and father a few years back on Alderaan, yet she still yearned to know more and learn about them, to know what happened to them. Each time she asked, Kenobi would tell her bits and pieces of Anakin and Padme stories. Anakin was a fearless Jedi general during the Clone Wars. He led legions to victory, and he always took care of his men and those he loved, no matter the cost. Padme was loving, kind, stubborn in a good way, and senator in the Galactic Senate before the days of the Empire. She had always fought for those who couldn't fight for themselves, and her heart was always in the right place. Leia loved these stories, and while they didn't hold much, she grasped onto them with all of her heart. She loved the Organas as her own parents, but the thought of her birth parents excited her, and it made her feel like she knew a little bit more of herself each time she learned about them. Around the time of the death of Minister Lua, Kenobi decided it was time for Leia to be trained in the ways of lightsaber combat. While most of all texts and teachings of this were either burned, lost, or hidden away, Kenobi knew the basics of Forms 1 through 6, and was even deemed a master of Form 3 by Mace Windu during the Clone Wars. He would hopefully be able to teach the young girl well. Ben would offer her the lightsaber of her father, finally revealing his full name to her, Anakin Skywalker. Leia would take the weapon in her hands, igniting it and staring at the blade. Obi-Wan would smile. She reminded him of her father, the way she held the lightsaber, the way she swung it, the way she stood with it. It all reminded him so much of his former apprentice. A tear would hide on his face as he remembered all the memories he had with Anakin, but those were gone. Anakin was gone. A moment passed, and then Leia felt something in the Force. Something dark. She tried to think nothing of it, but it filled her mind. She asked Obi-Wan what happened to her father, her real father, wanting to know how he died. Obi-Wan stepped back. While she had asked many questions about her birth parents, she never asked this. He had even told Bail that he would not reveal this bit of truth to her, yet he had to. She needed to trust him. She needed to know the truth of her past, and she needed to find balance in the Force through it. Kenobi sat Leia down as she deignited the lightsaber. He told her that her father had fallen to the dark side. He explained that the Emperor manipulated Anakin, turning him against Kenobi, Padme, the entire Order, and even himself. Then he winced. The next words out of his mouth would be the hardest thing to come, and the hardest thing for him to say. Telling her that his best friend, her father, Anakin Skywalker, died to himself when he became Darth Vader, an apprentice to the Emperor. Kenobi tried to shed a tear, but he couldn't. He missed Anakin. Though he had come to terms with the fact that he was not to blame with himself, it still pained him. Leia looked up in shock, dropping the lightsaber to the ground. She opened her mouth, but the words could not come out. She thought to herself, wondering why Kenobi had never told her this. Why couldn't she know? As if reading her mind, Kenobi stood up in front of her, saying that he wished he could have told her sooner, but he needed to make sure she was ready. If the Empire found out about her, they would come for her, kill her, torture her, do anything to make her a slave to the dark side. He proceeded to tell her that not even Vader knew about his children, and she had to keep that secret between them. She agreed, understanding the reasoning, but it still hurt that Kenobi kept this from her for so long. Leia would leave training immediately, spending the coming days locked in her room. At first, she spent hours sobbing, hurting with the fact that her father, her own flesh and blood, was an agent of gruesome evils and chaos across the galaxy. After she had exhausted herself from crying, she sat and stared at a wall, her head empty, almost by accident. This turned into a meditation in the Force, one that was more powerful than she ever had experienced before. She sat, eyes closed, looking into the Force. In meditation, Leia saw a young man with long, dark brown hair and piercing blue eyes. He stood atop a pile of rubble, talking to who looked to be a young Obi-Wan Kenobi during the Battle of Urbana. Anakin would step down from this high ground and walk through a stream of oncoming blaster fire. He was brave. She then saw her mother, a young beautiful woman with long brunette hair and warm chestnut brown eyes. She was speaking in the Senate chamber in front of thousands of representatives about some sort of peace negotiations with a group called the Separatists. Leia recognized this place. As a recent Imperial Senate junior legislator, she had been there a few times. She could not believe that her own mother had spoken to that many people all at once. After a few more hours of meditation, Leia came to finding that there were no longer light coming through her bedroom window. She didn't know how long she had been there, but it couldn't have been all day, could it? She opened the door to leave her room in search of Ben, hoping to find him and talk to him about what she had just seen. As she opened the door, she saw Kenobi sitting at the door, meditating. She tried to step over him, but Ben awoke, chuckling. He stood up and hugged her in an embrace, apologizing for not telling her sooner. Leia was quick to forgive him, telling Ben that she had a vision of her father and another of her mother. And it made sense why he only wanted to tell her the good parts of their lives. She knew that they were good people, and she understood what Kenobi meant when he said that Anakin was gone. And it was only Vader that remained. Ben told her to get some rest. They would begin training the next day. As the morning sun lit up the sky, Leia and Ben would return to their training. Leia, blindfolded, once again held her father's lightsaber in her hand as she deflected shots from training droid after training droid. Yet the hilt felt heavy in her hand. It filled her with dark emotions, and it made her question her entire existence. She took off the blindfold as she deignited the lightsaber and told Obi-Wan that she couldn't. She handed Anakin's lightsaber, telling him that if she was to train with one of these weapons, it had to be her own. Obi-Wan smiled. She was stubborn, as her father. Actually, her mother too. Just in a different way. Luckily, he knew of a place to find her a kyber crystal. At least, for the time being. Back with the 7th Fleet, Luke would experience a change in command. Fleet Admiral Sertan would be taken out of duty, being replaced by a recently promoted Grand Admiral Thrawn. His blue-skinned Chiss was a change from the temperamental, hot-headed, battle-chasing Sertan. One that Luke quite liked. Thrawn had a liking of history, art, and culture, and his previous battle record showed his immense talent with battle strategies. Luke admired him, and volunteered himself on his first mission under the new Grand Admiral, to take out the rebels attempting to steal ships from the Rackham station. Biggs and Tank were quick to offer their piloting skills up as well, jumping on the opportunity to prove themselves to Thrawn. The Grand Admiral was quite impressed. It was very rare to see officers offer themselves up for battle against the rebels, especially that of the members of Phoenix Squadron. Upon arrival at Rackham Station in the Yarma system, the 3 young men from Tatooine, alongside of a handful of other pilots, were ready in the cockpits of their fighters. They immediately took off into space, engaging in near-immediate battle with a small squadron of Y-Wings. As the firing commenced from both sides, Luke saw an opportunity to take out 2 different Y-Wings in a daring nosedive towards the planet Yarma. The boy cheered as he pulled his ship up before diving it back down at full speed toward the rebels. He loved the thrill of flying, just as his father had, and he wasn't afraid to let it show. In one swift take, Luke shot 2 Y-Wings out of the sky, the ships exploding in grandeur. He went on to shoot down another ship, before noticing that one of his fellow TIE fighters had been shot down. He tried not to think about it. Chances were that it was a new recruit, not someone he knew. It hurt a little to see a life taken away by such violent insurgents, but it was part of war, and Luke had to come to expect it at this point. As he continued on, a small rebel fleet exited hyperspace, led by the Ghost. Luke knew that ship all too well, and he concentrated on it as he barreled towards the surface of the planet. While Biggs and another TIE were able to take out another 2 Y-Wings, 3 were able to escape into the carrier of the rebel ship, which immediately took up a defensive position, protecting the carrier. Little to the Empire's knowing, Luke had destroyed the bomber that was carrying the rebel known as Gazeb Aurelius. Unfortunately for the Empire, the other 3 destroyed Y-Wings were being remotely piloted by an astromech droid by the name of Chopper. Thrawn was present via holo communications. He told the Star Destroyer to hold their fire and let the small rebel fleet escape. They earned their meager reward for the day. As if hearing Thrawn say as much, the rebel fleet jumped into hyperspace, away from the station. Luke, not following exact orders, just like his father, chased the Ghost down into the atmosphere of Yarma, flying through the dust and gas that was enveloping the falling Rackham station. He couldn't see the rebel ship, but he could feel one of the people on it, somehow. He didn't have time to dwell on this, though, as pieces of debris and machinery flying through the dust at him, using his piloting skills and the Force, though he didn't know he was using it, Luke was able to make it down to the station. Seeing the Ghost beside it, hanging out of the ship was a young man with a blindfold on, and he was reaching out towards what looked to be an even younger man who looked to be the same age as Luke. Luke smiled to himself. This couldn't be easier, he thought. Luke fired on the Ghost, shaking it and gaining the attention of the blindfolded man. For a moment, The man continued to reach for the boy, trying to grab hold of him. Luke shot again, testing how far these rebels would go to save a child. The man, Kanan Jarrus, looked back at Luke again. He used what Luke could only assume to be was a force to throw a chunk of debris at the TIE Advance windshield, shattering it on impact. Luke was taken aback. This halted his descent while the ship was still operational. He couldn't see anything out the window. He turned his ship around, leaving the planet's atmosphere and contacting the Star Destroyer, that the rebels had damaged his ship and he needed to be brought in via tractor beam. As he slowed and approached the Imperial fleet, he thought back on what just happened. He was intrigued. This blindfolded man was not able to know where everything was, but how was he able to use such precision to hit Luke right in the windshield? He thought further. Was it luck? Was it a trick? Was the man blind or just wearing face protection? He knew the man used the Force. Could he be a Jedi? All the questions that he would ponder, he would keep to himself, for now. The mission was successful for Luke. They had prevented the theft of 4 Y-Wings, with only 1 casualty on their end. As he returned to the bridge of the ship, though, all eyes turned to him. Confused, he walked to the viewport where Biggs was standing. Luke thought for a moment, asking where Tank was. Luke knew the answer the second the words came out of his mouth. The casualty, it was him. The rebels had killed his childhood friend. A rage boiled within him. As he slammed his hand against the window, he wanted the rebels to pay. He was going to get revenge on them no matter what. Upon arriving back to the orbit of Lothal, Luke was met by Thrawn on the bridge of the Chimera, the flagship of the 7th Fleet. Thrawn would congratulate the captain in his pursuits and how they were valiant. Thrawn turned away from Luke and paced, planning his next steps on their mission. He was going to promote Luke to commander, effective immediately. Luke thanked the Grand Admiral and moved to leave, but Thrawn held him back a moment longer, asking him to spearhead a classified initiative on the surface of Lothal, asking if Luke was up to the challenge. At the time, Luke was not even 18 years old yet. While he had achieved a great deal in only a year and a half of full military service, he didn't know if he was able to be up for the task, so he asked what it was. Thrawn told him that the only way he could know is if he took the position. He could tell that Luke was hesitant, as Thrawn told Luke that it was something that he would enjoy, being a pilot and all. Thrawn, though he knew Luke for only a few weeks, trusted the boy, and he knew Vader did too. Luke would accept his position, under the conditions that Biggs come with him. He already lost 1 friend and he couldn't lose another. While the Imperial officials in the room were attempted to deny this request, Thrawn allowed it. He was not as strict as the others, and the idea that friendship was a waste. It created spirit, and it gave their troops something to fight for. Luke, Biggs, and Thrawn took the coming days to tour the Lothal factories. Even though the 2 boys had been stationed above the planet for well over a year, they had not been taken down to the surface yet. They were in awe of the massive walkers and ships that they saw, taking every sight in. Thrawn would explain to them that his TIE Defender initiative and what exactly the ship entailed. The TIE Defender would have a hyperdrive built into it, something only known to be on TIE Advanced fighters at the time, as well as shield deflectors. With this, the plan was to give the small starship a massive weapons array, giving the fire to take on any mission without the need for a capital ship. Luke and Biggs were amazed. They had never seen such a powerful ship that was so small and compact. Thrawn told Luke his post. He and Biggs would be stationed here, in the factory, overseeing the design and testing of the TIE Defender. While they were vying for resources and credits just like every other Imperial project, Thrawn was confident that they would be able to begin a larger scale production of their ships within the year. Thrawn would depart from the planet, leaving Luke and Biggs in charge. They would report all progress to the governor of Lothal and Yada Price. They would also have to access the Imperial workers, resources units, and space on the planet. Thrawn's military career was riding on this project, and Luke was not going to let him down. Back on Alderaan, or more so a large astrofield on the far reaches in the Alderaan system, Leia and Ben Kenobi were searching for a kyber crystal. While Leia wanted to craft her own lightsaber, Kenobi knew that venturing to Ilum, Utapau, or even Lothal would be too dangerous for the two. While he didn't know why, he could sense it through the Force, that the temples were no longer safe. He did, however, recall a text that he read back before the Clone Wars, one that detailed of a unique kyber crystal, thousands of years prior in the Old Republic. Jedi Padawans and younglings used to venture to the asteroid belt on the edge of the Alderaanian system to find the boulder crystals. These crystals were unlike any other, as they were non-lethal, only stunning an opponent rather than killing them. These young Jedi of the past used them as training blades and sparring blades. While Kenobi knew that Leia needed an actual lightsaber at some point, this would have to make do for now. On the asteroid, Ben gave Leia a simple instruction: trust in the Force, as he called a young Skywalker. Leia was taken aback. She had never been called a Skywalker before. She didn't know how to feel about it. Kenobi sat down on a rocky terrain outside of their ship. Leia understood. This was a journey she would have to make on her own. Leia walked away, not entirely sure of what to do next. She would walk to the surface of the asteroid, eventually losing sight of Kenobi and the ship behind her. She found nothing as she walked, becoming concerned that Ben's information was wrong. She thought, was this the right asteroid? Did the crystal still exist? Was it a myth? As these doubts clouded her mind, she heard a faint ringing sound. She thought nothing of it, and she continued walking. After hours, Leia made her way around the entire asteroid in a straight line, arriving behind the ship. As she walked past the ship, she noticed that Kenobi was no longer sitting there. A pang of fear struck her chest as she frantically looked around, searching for her master. He was nowhere to be found. Leia sat down in the same place Ben was only hours before at, and began meditating. She trusted him, but she had so many doubts and so much fear that clouded her. She listened to the Force, trying to seek out Ben. Still, she saw nothing, heard nothing, felt nothing. Calming her mind, Leia tried to focus on the Force, just the Force. She knew that if nothing else, maybe the Force would be able to show her where the Kyber crystal would be, and ensure that this journey was not all for nothing. Minutes passed, and then hours, as Leia sat in meditation. She was so incessant on finding the crystal that she herself didn't notice Ben walk over the horizon of the asteroid and past her, and walk into the ship, smiling the entire time. Eventually, Leia heard the same ringing she did halfway across the planet. She had her doubts about following the noise, but she wasn't about this mission go to waste. Jumping up, Leia ran, following the ringing. While the sound filled her head, she was able to tell the direction it came from. It was leading her right back to where she was before. The moment she reached the place where she initially heard the ringing, she saw it, a glowing rock hiding amongst the crevices. Reaching down and grabbing a hold of it, she would feel a sense of accomplishment and relief. This was it. Leia pulled out a light white crystal, holding it in her hand. She felt its minimal weight in her hands, grasping it tightly, and feeling utter joy for it. Though she was halfway across the asteroid, she sprinted back to the ship in mere minutes, finding Kenobi sitting at the base of the ship, waiting for her. As the two made their way onto the ship, Kenobi sat Leia down in front of a diverse set of lightsaber parts he was able to scavenge over the years. He told her to meditate, to use the Force to move the objects into place. While she was still in some doubt about the Force and how it truly worked, she understood the assignment. Ben sat down in the cockpit, taking off the ship and taking it towards Alderaan. On the flight home, Leia struggled. While it was not even a 2-hour journey back, it felt like days to her. She was able to get a lot of pieces in order, but she couldn't find the correct position for the emitter matrix. When the ship landed on Alderaan, she was still working with the parts, and Ben could tell that she was struggling. He could sense the doubt within her. The doubts of the Force and the doubts of her connection to it. Sitting down next to her, Kenobi reached into his robes and pulled out a deep white kyber crystal of his own, asking her to watch him. Leia opened her eyes to see Ben using the Force, holding the crystal in the air. He sat completely still. Lightsaber components levitated around the crystal, telling her to trust in the Force. It was her greatest ally. We don't have to understand it, we just have to trust it's going to guide us. The pieces of the saber floated closer and closer together, before coming into one place with a nice click. Kenobi stood up, watching Leia. She closed her eyes once again, and took in a deep breath. A calm breath. She focused on the pieces, seeing them in her mind, picturing where they were, letting the Force take control of her. She raised the pieces. For the first time, she knew exactly where they were supposed to be, and how they fit together. She didn't understand it, but she didn't have to. After only a moment, she heard a click, opening her eyes to see a fully constructed lightsaber sitting before her. It was beautiful, smooth, a metal hilt with black grips on the bottom, and a slanted blade emitter. Kenobi watched and smiled. It looked so much like Anakin's first lightsaber, but Leia didn't know that. She stood up and ignited the blade. It glowed a white-pink color, illuminating the inside of the ship. Kenobi ignited his blade, which emitted a darker pink color. Kenobi, in classic Obi-Wan fashion, spun his blade behind his back. It was freeing. He hadn't crafted a new blade in decades, and it felt nice. The two would exit the ship, and Kenobi would tell Leia to get some rest. She, though, insisted that she wanted to start her training immediately, and if that was okay with Ben. He smiled. The passion and the desire to improve was more of something that came from her father. They would go into the Forest near Organa Palace, and Kenobi would begin teaching Leia the basics of Form 1. Luke, while not even knowing about his Force sensitivity, was busy as ever commanding the TIE Defender project, working day and night. He was obsessed with this new starfighter. While the project had only been ongoing for a while, he just joined it. The technicians were making very little progress. It was near impossible, for them at least, to figure out how to house a shield generator, a hyperdrive, a tractor beam, projector, and a massive weapons array all within a single compact occupant fighter. Luckily, Luke and Biggs were more than just Imperial technicians. They were Tatooine-trained technicians. They had spent most of their lives, up to this point, living and working on Tatooine. They fixed all kinds of machines, from vaporators to skyhoppers to pod racers. Luke and Biggs were supposed to be overseeing the project, not acting as mechanics or technicians, but they couldn't pass up the opportunity. Within just weeks of joining the TIE Fighter project, Luke was able to find a way around the load problems. He found a way to internalize the hyperdrive behind the cockpit, rather than mounting it externally, or within the frame of the fighter. While this would take away from the interior space of the ship, it would maximize efficiency and allow for an even larger hyperdrive than initially planned. Plus, it was a one-person ship. The pilots didn't really need all that much space behind them. With this, Biggs confirmed what several technicians had already propositioned, that the ship did not carry life support capabilities. Most every pilot in the Imperial Navy wore life support armor to fly typical TIE fighters, and it worked extremely well. Adding life support within the ship would only take up more space that wasn't essential. With Luke and Biggs taking such a large improvement in the project, and with them also working on other mechanical elements on the design, the ship was ready for its first test flight only 6 months after the boys joined the project. The Grand Admiral had given Luke permission to use any Imperial prisoners as test pilots for the ship, with their weapons and navigation computers being remotely controlled, of course. Yet Luke was not too keen on risking lives to test a ship that had never been flown before. Luke was loyal to the Empire, wholeheartedly, but he wasn't cruel, much like the rest of his fellow officers. He didn't know, though, that Thrawn would want proof of success before being called to the factory, so he scheduled a test flight of the TIE Defender, with an astromech remote flying the vessel. As the day for the test came, Luke and Biggs were giddy with excitement. They couldn't wait to see their work finally come to fruition. The Defender took off, and the Imperial astromech beeped and hummed. The ship shot across the sky at speeds higher than a TIE could ever reach. Luke was even a little jealous. He kind of hoped to get his hands on one of these and replace his own ship. It wasn't much more advanced than the TIE Advanced. The speed alone was a pilot's dream, though. After the success of the first test flight, Luke contacted Thrawn, telling him the good news, and asking him to come visit the factory and see it for himself. Thrawn was amused. He was already in the factory. He had just seen the test flight from the governor's command office. He was thoroughly impressed, and he congratulated the boys on their work. While there had been very few rebel incidents on the planet since Luke and Biggs were assigned, they were not major incidents, and Luke and Biggs never interacted with the insurgents. That was until this day. Thrawn had been at the factory to deal with something completely unrelated to the TIE Defender project. As the test flight was commencing, Thrawn was preparing to begin an investigation into potential sabotage of the factory workers, as many vehicles and speeders produced were malfunctioning at immense rates, killing troopers and risking missions and engagements. Thrawn would ask Luke and Biggs to accompany him to confront the workers, and they would agree. In front of the lines of workers, Governor Price, Agent Callus, Luke, Biggs, and several other Imperial officers watched as Grand Admiral Thrawn spoke to the factory employees. Thrawn would instruct a former farmer to sit atop the last speeder he constructed to test it. As the vehicle gained speed, the engine began overheating, turning a deep orange color. The worker attempted to power the vehicle down, stating that something was wrong and he must have made a mistake. So, Thrawn told him that the demonstration was not over. Thrawn used his tablet to repower the speeder, bringing it into full speed, and within seconds, the speeder exploded, killing the man. Thrawn made his point. Any vehicle made in this factory would be personally tested by those who crafted it. Luke, who had been silent to the point, felt something inside of him. He didn't know what it was, but it pulled at him, drawing him to two workers that stood at the end of the lineup. Slowly, Luke approached them, trying to stare into their masks to make out their faces. Thrawn spoke up, asking Luke if something was wrong, to which Luke stepped back, telling the Grand Admiral that it was all clear. Thrawn commanded that the factory be locked down, and nobody be allowed to escape. As he did, a speeder nearby shot out of its holding grip and exploded into a handful of crates nearby. Luke watched as the two workers he was drawn to ran out of the room, followed by an older model astromech. Not thinking, Luke chased after them, wanting to ensure the safety of his project. He knew that if the rebels were here, they would want to obtain the confidential TIE Defender files. Chasing them through the compound, Luke was able to tackle the shorter boy and rip his mask off. and it revealed that it was a young man he had seen nearly a year earlier, falling with the Rakam station to the surface of Yarma. Luke was shocked. A Jedi, or at least he thought it was a Jedi, who had infiltrated his factory. While he was realizing the scale of threat to his life, the old Ashmek rammed into Luke, knocking him off of Ezra. The young Jedi jumped up, running away. The taller worker, who Luke assumed was the older Jedi, used the Force to attempt to push Luke back. Luke, though, was determined and stubborn. He would not let these criminals ruin the proudest piece of work he had. Luke, while not fully realizing it, subconsciously used the Force to withstand Kanan's Force push, standing his ground. Kanan was shocked. He ran away with his apprentice, with Luke chasing after them. Unable to get any stormtrooper uniforms, and without the assistance of Agent Kallus, since with Zeb being dead, never became a deadly agent, the two Jedi and the droid were lost for options of escape. Luckily for them, the local rebels on the planet had attacked the east gate of the facility. The three rebels ran as fast as they could, knowing that their allies would be able to at least extract them. As they arrived at the chaos of the east gate, Kanan, Ezra, and Chopper were all able to miraculously hijack a walker. Luke was screaming to the other officers that they were rebels and they were not to let them escape, but nobody liked taking orders from an 18-year-old inferior commander. The rebels were able to make their escape, taking out a few extra walkers on their way out, for good measure. Luke was defeated. He couldn't believe he froze up at the sight of a Jedi, especially in such a pivotal moment. Thrawn would call Luke into his office, where Luke thought he was going to be chewed out for his failure. Yet, Thrawn had something else in mind. The rebels had not gained access to the TIE Defender files. They hadn't even gotten to that area of the factory. With this, the factory was no longer subject to sabotage of the rebels. To Thrawn, that was a momentous victory. He handed Luke a new uniform, one with a Vice Admiral patch on it. Thrawn congratulated Luke on having two major successes in the same day, both of which were heavy hits to the continuously defeated rebellion. Luke, astounded, thanked the Grand Admiral. He moved to exit the command room, but paused. He turned back around and spoke up to Thrawn, telling him that the rebels in the factory were Jedi. He explained that he could feel that they were there from the beginning, and that one of them tried to use some sort of force on him, but it didn't work. Thrawn frowned. This was not typical. The abilities of a Jedi were not known to just not work. Thrawn told the now Vice Admiral Skywalker that he would have to think on these findings. Over the coming weeks, Luke would find himself dwelling on his interaction with the Jedi. The TIE Defender was making significant progress, with actual pilots including Biggs test flying the vehicles each day, testing the Defender limits time and time again. Luke, though, was still confused. He should have lost that interaction with the two Jedi. He should have failed even more than he did, but he didn't. And what was that gut feeling when he first saw them? He had no idea, but he was losing sleep over it. Thrawn, who stayed on Lothal during this time, to continue the oversight of the successful TIE Defender program, noticed the shift in the boy, who he kind of thought of as his own apprentice. While he tried to keep the boy occupied, he did make contact with the only other Force-sensitive person he knew, at least one that wouldn't try to steal Luke away from his project. Darth Vader, via holocommission. Thrawn told Vader of all the things Luke explained to him about the Jedi rebels and his experience with them. Luke was curious about this, deciding to come to Lothal himself and meet the boy once more. Upon arrival to Lothal, Vader found Luke in a command office with Thrawn and Governor Price. Price was shocked, not expecting to see Vader here. She talked frantically about their output numbers and about how the sabotage in the assembly lines had been corrected, but Vader shut her up, telling her to leave. Vader would approach Luke, standing tall above him. He asked the young Vice Admiral Skywalker about his life, where he was from, who his parents were, and why he joined the Empire. Luke told the towering metal Sith Lord that he was from Tatooine, raised by his Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru. His parents died when he was very young, and he never knew them. Those names rang on in Vader's mind. He knew them. Owen and Beru. Anakin, had met them a long time ago, on a day that his mother died. Then it clicked. Vader realized that the Emperor had lied. Padme had given birth before she did die, and Luke was their child. This young man standing before him was his son. Rage against the Emperor boiled within Vader. He was questioning everything the Dark Lord had ever told him. Was it a lie? Luke asked his lord, Darth Vader, if he would like to see the TIE Defender for himself, ensuring him that he would be impressed with the progress that they made. Assuming that that was the visit that Vader was here for, this snapped Vader out of his thoughts, and he nodded. Luke would lead him to the classified hangar bay outside of the factory. He used his comm link to contact Biggs. He told Biggs that Lord Vader was here to see the TIE Defender in action, and Biggs should be the pilot to show off the ship. Biggs, excited as ever, was quick to hop into one of the TIE fighters and take off, blowing past a group and shooting across the sky. Biggs, a natural show-off, used the weapons on the ship to take out some fall cats in a nearby prairie. Luke even took out his personal blaster and with pinpoint accuracy fired at the TIE Defender to demonstrate its shields. Vader was impressed beyond belief. While this wasn't the reason he came to the factory, although Luke thought it to be, he was very pleased to see such a large initiative coming to success. Some weeks later, Vader instructed Thrawn to bring Luke alongside of him to a budget briefing between Krennic and the Death Star team. Thrawn and the Defender team, Grand Moff Tarkin, Vader, and the Emperor himself. Walking into this meeting, Luke was terrified beyond belief. He had never met the Emperor. He was also terrified of Tarkin. He was the only student to ever outrank the Grand Moff at the Pressvout Fleet camp, and he was worried the man might hold it against him. As the meeting began, though, the group was welcoming of young Skywalker, all congratulating him on his successes of the TIE Defender model. The talks would begin, with Krennic arguing for more resources to be put towards the Death Star initiative. He argued that it would be a massive display of force, and the Defender project no longer needed resources. Since its first stage development was such a huge success, Thrawn, on the other hand, argued that his own project, stating that they would be able to take the Stage 1 TIE fighters out of commission, replacing them with highly advanced TIE Defenders. The talks and arguments continued among all of them except Luke, Vader, and the Emperor. These three stayed silent, simply observing the chaos unfold before them. While Luke was not fully informed about the Death Star initiative, he quickly learned most of everything there was to know about the plans by simply listening to the men bicker. At one point, he even heard Tarkin attempt to argue for the construction of a Star Destroyer that was to be Palpatine's personal flagship, the Eclipse. After hours went by with no progress, Luke stood up. The room went silent. It was irregular enough for an 18-year-old boy to be at one of these meetings, much less attempt to speak. Thrawn pulled at Luke's shirt, telling him to sit down, reminding them that he was only here to observe. Vader, though, interrupted the Grand Admiral, asking him to let the boy speak. Thrawn was embarrassed. He took his hand away from Luke and sat back in his chair. Luke spoke up, saying if they were able to use available resources in order to propel the mass production of a TIE Defender, the Death Star could be dismantled, and its parts could be used to build the Eclipse. The weapon, the one meant for the Death Star, could be reconfigured and constructed on the Eclipse. Krennic and Tarkin would rebut this, saying that making the weapon any smaller would be impossible. Luke responded that, if given some time, he thought he could find a way to make the super laser compact enough to fit into the Star Destroyer. Palpatine would stand up, speak, something he rarely did at these meetings, such as this one. He would tell the group that he approved of young Skywalker's plan, and this young man would be moved from Lothal and transferred to the Kuat drive yards immediately, and work on the project with Director Krennic. During this year or so, Kenobi and Leia would train vigorously in lightsaber combat. Their training was hyper-realistic, unlike the training of Padawans in the Clone Wars, since they could actually strike at one another with their blades. Sure, it would stun the loser for a short time, but it was never painful. This training gave Leia a true sense of what lightsaber combat would be like, and it taught her many great lessons, including teaching her her own weaknesses and strengths. With this, she would eventually be able to leave her position in the Imperial Senate as a junior legislator, instead putting all of her time and effort into training. Not that it mattered, since the Senate would be dissolved within the coming year anyways. Eventually, Ben felt it was time to take an extended journey with Leia. He recalled a tale of the Old Republic, one of which detailed the Corellian holocron family of the Jedi Knights and their use of Rundifier kyber crystals from Tatooine. With Ilum, Utapau, and Lothal still under heavy Imperial control, Kenobi felt that the desert planet was the best place to find Leia her own fully functional kyber crystal. The two would depart for Tatooine, with Leia somewhat unsure as to their mission. Kenobi loved this young woman as if she was his daughter, and he wanted to surprise her with what was in store. Upon arrival on Tatooine, Kenobi would dock his ship in the Dune Sea, away from all the chaos in Mos Espa and the Mos Eisley. Here, he would sit and wait. Unlike on the asteroid, where he was searching for Bondar crystal of his own, he had nothing to do here but wait. The Dune Sea was vast, and the crystals were hard to come by. Jawas used them to make lenses for their goggles, and the Hutts traded any that they found to the Empire. Leia left the ship, alone, searching for her crystal. While she expected the search to take hours or even days, and she expected that the discovery would even challenge her, just as the search on the asteroid did, she was mistaken. She had grown in the Force. coming to terms with her doubts and finding balance within herself in less than a year. She was able to see a group of Jawas in the distance, standing next to a sand crawler. As she approached them, she watched as they dug through the sand ferociously. Occasionally, one would jump up with something in his hand, and then running back to their sand crawler. She heard a familiar ringing in the forest. She knew that the kyber crystal was here for her. She got down on her knees and began digging through the sand with her hands, hoping to find something. However, a handful of Jawas came up behind her and began screaming Jawese at her. They kicked her in the leg and threw some sand back into the hole she was digging. To her, though, this was a challenge of her patience that the Force was giving her. Reaching into her robes, Leia pulled out her blaster, and it was the same rifle that old Ben had gave her all those years ago. Sure, it would be sad to lose it, but with a lightsaber in hand, she wouldn't need it any longer. The Jawas jumped back, pulling out their own stun rifles, but Leia put her gun on the ground, saying that this was for them in exchange for helping me find one of the crystals. She wasn't sure if they could understand her, but she had to try. While the Jawas didn't totally comprehend Galactic Common, they did understand trading and bargaining. They could tell by her digging that she wanted a crystal, so when she kicked her blaster rifle over to them, offering, they began digging. Within mere moments, a Jawa near Leia screamed in delight, pulling a silver crystal from the sand. The Jawa handed it to Leia, who thanked them for all of their work before returning to the ship. On her return, Kenobi was impressed. It had not even been 2 hours, and she had already returned with their crystal. He told her that they had one more place to visit, and to use their flight to construct her new lightsaber. On the ride to their next destination, Leia meditated in the Force, the crystal, as well as the lightsaber components that were all needed in front of her. While constructing her second saber was nowhere as quick and easy as Kenobi had done it, it didn't take her nearly as long as it did the last time she constructed one. Within an hour and a half or so, she held in her hand a new lightsaber, this one totally unique from any Kenobi had ever seen. The metal on the hilt was grainy and dark, while the emitter was almost pointed. When she ignited it, a silver blade illuminated the room. Kenobi had only heard tales of such a blade. He was awestruck at the sight of it. Almost immediately after Leia completed her lightsaber, Ben pulled their ship out of hyperspace. In front of them was a deep green planet. Kenobi would land the vessel in the swamp, seemingly in the middle of nowhere. Leia was very confused. She had no idea why they were here or why they came here. She had no idea where they were, and she didn't know if Ben knew either. Coming out of nowhere, Leia heard something. An old voice saying the name Master Kenobi. Obi-Wan rebutted by saying hello to Master Yoda, and telling him to meet the daughter of Anakin Skywalker. Yoda smiled and chuckled, saying that he did remember her. A long time ago he met her. Yoda reached out his hand to shake that of Leia's. She was somewhat taken aback. Kenobi had told her about Master Yoda early in her training. He had explained the former Jedi Order and how Yoda was the Grand Master of the Order, yet she never expected Yoda to look like he did. She had never seen one of his species before. Yoda began walking away, telling her to come with him. Yoda led the two towards his makeshift hut, where a pot of stew was boiling over a fire. Yoda told them to rest. The next few days would be difficult. As the sun rose the next day over the swamps of Dagobah, Yoda brought Leia and Kenobi down into the forest. Here, he had them meditate in the Force. Leia was immediately drawn in by the Force, feeling a deeper connection than she ever had before. The planet radiated with the light side of the Force. She could feel it filling her and guiding her. After hours of meditation, Yoda would instruct her in different training exercises. The former Grand Master would instruct her in the ways of Form 4 lightsaber combat, as well as in using the Force to guide her actions and movements. Over the coming weeks, she, as well as Ben, would grow even more in the Force, learning from the short old man. Yoda would eventually decide to take the two to a cave beneath a large tree, and he had entered here decades earlier. Here, he would tell young Skywalker to enter, and leave her lightsaber at the entrance. So Leia did, walking down into the cave and through a stone archway. As she passed through it, a dark cloud filled the air, circling around her and trapping her here. Visions began appearing in the darkness, ones of pain and suffering. She saw a young blonde man wielding a red lightsaber and seated at the hand of the Emperor. Then she saw herself dressed in all black and wielding a crimson blade at the left hand of the Emperor. She watched as she herself struck down her father, taking his place. She screamed and denied that this could ever happen, but the visions continued. She saw herself using her crimson blade to stab Kenobi through the chest. She watched herself cut Master Yoda into two. Finally, she saw herself order the eclipse to destroy her home planet of Alderaan. Leia, after seeing all this, stumbled out of the cave, barely conscious, and collapsed on the swamp floor. She tried to explain all of what she saw to the two Jedi Masters, but they stopped her. Yoda explained to her that she saw her own fears in the cave, and that it was one of many possibilities. Only she could decide if it would become true. While this haunted her still, she sighed with relief, knowing that there was hope that the future she saw may never come true. As the three returned to Yoda's hut, Ben informed Leia that she must travel back to Alderaan alone. His time there was over. He would be staying on Dagobah with Master Yoda. While she did not want to lose Ben again, she understood. He told her if they ever needed them, they would be right here on Dagobah. Leia would shed a tear as she nodded and hugged Kenobi. He gave her a book with a list of Jedi temples, ones that could be lost to time, ones that the Empire would not have located. As Leia walked back to the ship, Kenobi and Yoda would leave, walking back to the cave, for Kenobi to experience what she just had. Leia would board her ship and take off, leaving the swamp planet to return home. Over the coming years, Leia would train alone in the Force. Occasionally, she would travel to lost Jedi temples in the galaxy, searching out ancient texts and teachings. While she couldn't access major ancient temples, she was able to learn and study the materials she found. At the same time, Luke would reside at the Kuat Drive Yard station, overseeing the construction of the Eclipse. While the Death Star was being decommissioned, Luke had access to an abundance of resources. While he was technically in charge of the project, Director Krennic had an equal say as him, often interfering with Luke's plans. Krennic was spiteful. Luke had been one to foil the Death Star plans and bring an end to his life's work. Still, the two had to make the Emperor happy, so they did what they had to do. Krennic and Luke were somehow able to condense the Kyber crystal-powered super laser within the ship. Using a series of 8 large Kyber crystals, the weapon was functional, yet it would only act as 2/3 of the power of the Death Star. The crystals had to be smaller to ensure stabilization within the ship. While Krennic saw this as a success, and argued that for the model to be used in the final construction, Luke would not accept this. 2/3 was not good enough. Luke would work day and night on the math behind their issue. He created hollow models, experimental lasers, and so much more. Vader, and even the Emperor, would visit during this time. Luke paid no attention to them. He was so focused on the issue at hand. He needed to understand how to stabilize the crystals more, fully without losing their power. As months continued to pass, Luke struggled more and more, trying to find a solution to this. One day, eventually, it would click. He would realize the obvious answer in front of him. If he would be able to use only smaller Kyber crystals, he could create the same amount of power the Death Star would have, if not more. Positioned correctly, the crystals would take up no extra space on the ship, but there could be hundreds of them, all powering the super laser. It was brilliant. Luke would take requests to meet with Tarkin, and asking for more Kyber crystals and resources to make this work. While the Grand Moff was not too fond of funneling even more resources into this project, he complied. If the super weapon within the Eclipse were to be a success, Tarkin would claim partial responsibility for it, gaining even more favor with the Emperor. With this, during these years, Vader's anger would grow. He realized more and more that Palpatine had lied to him. His entire existence, his whole life, was based on manipulation by this one man. Vader didn't know how yet, but he made a decision, one to kill the Emperor and take the seat of power in the Empire. As another year came to pass, Luke and Krennic would finally complete the massive Star Destroyer. This would be years ahead of schedule, and, excluding the massive amounts of Kyber crystals, it was massively under budget. The two would invite the Emperor, Vader, Thrawn, and Tarkin to watch the first test of the weapon aboard the Eclipse. The financial resource success allowed for the TIE Defender initiative to excel, the ship replacing the old TIE fighters in production. While there was an attack by the rebels on the Lothal fuel depot in an effort to halt production of fighters, it made very little impact. Governor Price, after losing the captured Hera Syndulla to Phoenix Squadron, found the rebels atop a fuel pod in the depot. Seeing this, she ordered an AT-AT Walker to fire on the depot pod, causing it to explode, killing Kanan Jarrus. While they stopped production of most of everything in Lothal City, it didn't matter. With so much success coming from the TIE Defenders, factories for them had been set up all over the planet of Lothal, as well as countless others on other worlds across the galaxy. It was far too late for the rebels to stop the Defender program. The only bright side of all of this, for the rebellion, was that after the incident, Leia Organa finally made the decision to join the ranks of the rebels. She had heard so much about the destruction caused by the TIE Defenders, and hearing the death of Kanan Jarrus, she decided that she would join the rebellion. They needed another Jedi in their ranks. Leia would spend her first few months in the rebellion meeting Ezra and the Phoenix Squadron. She would run missions with them on Lothal, helping them find minor successes where they could. However, her stint with them ended when the Ghost received the transmission from Rebel High Command. They informed the crew that Senator Bail Organa had gotten word of a new Super Star Destroyer that had been constructed at the Kuat Drive Yards, and it was equipped with some sort of massive laser weapon. While the mission to investigate was meant for the crew of the Ghost and Phoenix Group, the Phoenix Group was not willing to leave Lothal. The death of Kanan was still fresh, and they had to finish their work here. Leia, though, offered herself up for the mission. She knew how to pilot a fighter better than most, and she was up for the task, as Phoenix Group continued to plan their final attack on the Empire on Lothal. Leia would depart, making her way to the Kuat Drive Yards. As the day to test the Eclipse and its weapon came closer and closer, the Super Star Destroyer would be piloted by Luke to the Endor system. Here, Luke and Krennic would invite 4 guests aboard the ship, giving them a tour of everything it had to offer. The Emperor was pleased to see so much success in a short amount of time. He asked if he could see a demonstration of the super laser, to which Luke and Krennic both smiled, positioning the Eclipse above the forest moon of Endor. Luke ordered the charging of the laser. A humming began. Its sound began growing with each passing second. Then, a beam of light shot out of the front of the ship, making an impact with the forest moon of Endor. Seconds later, the moon exploded, nothing of it remaining in space. The Emperor cackled, enjoying this display of destruction. Tarkin and Thrawn clapped, impressed with the work of these 2 men. Now it was time to put the Eclipse into full commission. Back at the Kuat Drive Yards, Thrawn and Vader departed from the Eclipse, leaving Luke, Tarkin, and the Emperor aboard. Over the coming days, Luke would train the Imperial officers who would be deployed aboard the ship on how to operate his weapons and systems. Vader, meanwhile, realized that this would be perfect as an opportunity for his plans to come to fruition. Vader one night snuck aboard the Eclipse. Most of the crew was asleep, and those who weren't had no authority to question the Sith Lord or his presence here. Making his way to the weapon's computer, Vader pulled out a chip. He inserted it into the computer as an upload bar appeared on screen. His master was often able to predict his next moves, always one step ahead of Vader. Sidious, though, had one flaw. He forgot about Vader's past. While Anakin was no more, Vader still held the skills of Anakin that he once learned, including those relating to his machinery. Within moments, Vader extracted the chip, leaving the room. Vader then left the ship, nobody blinking an eye at his actions here. The same night, Leia would arrive at the shipyard on Kuat, using old transponder codes and an Imperial officer uniform to sneak inside with ease. She was not known as a rebel, her face not plastered on posters, and most of the Empire only knew her as a princess of Alderaan. She stayed low until the morning, scouting out the station. She learned that Vader and Thrawn were both here at the Kuat Drive Yards, and that the Emperor was still on the Eclipse, preparing to take it out for its maiden voyage. Leia made her way through the shipyard, finding Vader's quarters. The sun rose over Kuat as Leia stationed herself in a meeting room nearby Vader's current residence, pretending to work at one of the computers. On the Eclipse, Luke received the transmission that woke him from his sleep. The message came from Vader, who told him that his presence was required at the Kuat Drive station immediately. Luke never questioned the orders of Vader, so he made his way off the Super Star Destroyer and into the interior of the shipyard. As Luke entered the room in which he was to meet Vader, he saw the Sith Lord standing at the window, staring at the Eclipse. He told him to come forward, as he called him his son. Luke stuttered back. He was confused, asking if he was correct for saying son. Vader told Luke that he was his father. Luke walked up to Vader, standing next to him. Vader said before he was Darth Vader, his name was Anakin Skywalker. He joined the Empire to bring peace to the galaxy, but the Emperor, his master, lied to him, and now it was time that the 2 of them ruled the galaxy together as father and son. Taking out a small tablet, Vader pressed a few buttons, deactivating the kyber crystals on the Eclipse. He then used the device to fire the super laser. With the crystals destabilized, the super weapon overheated and then exploded. Soon after, the entire Super Star Destroyer exploded in a magnificent ball of flames, killing the Emperor, Tarkin, and everyone on the ship. Luke stood in horror. The last 3 years of his work were destroyed in seconds. Luke, though, had no time to think about this or anything else. Vader had just said. Leia, who had been trailing Vader, entered the room after hearing the massive explosion, igniting her lightsaber and making herself known. She rushed at the man she knew to be her father. Luke jumped in front of her, using his blaster to fire several bolts at her. Leia, though, deflected those bolts before cutting off Luke's arm. She then used the Force to push the man who was her brother aside, not to know of their relation, of course. Vader was impressed with the brave heart of his son. He smiled under his mask as he ignited his own lightsaber. The father and daughter lunged at each other, locking blades. The two began to duel, with Leia using her defensive form 3 techniques alongside of her offensive form 4 techniques to keep Vader at bay. The two moved back and forth, blocking each other's swings and parrying each other's blows. Eventually, Vader was able to land a hit, slicing Leia's leg open. Getting cocky, Vader began swinging harder, putting his full strength behind every blow. Leia, though, felt this. Using the Force, she pushed her father back, as she swung her lightsaber into the window of the station, shattering it. Vader stumbled backwards, and Leia rushed him, knocking him through the window. Vader was able to hold onto the windowsill for a slight moment, but Leia cut through his arms with a lightsaber. Vader fell down from the space station. As he fell, Leia used the Force to push him away from the floating shipyard, causing him to barrel towards the surface of the planet to his ultimate death. While Leia was doing this, though, Luke had an opportunity. Picking up his blaster, he fired 3 shots into Leia's back. Not expecting this, Leia was too slow to defend herself. She turned around towards Luke. He fired again, landing 2 more shots onto her chest, killing her. Hearing all the commotion, Thrawn made his way to the room, only catching the final moments of Luke killing Leia. He saw the young man who he had led for so many years lying on the floor, with his hand missing. Thrawn gasped and stood in shock. Luke cried out for help. Not seeing the Grand Admiral in the doorway, Thrawn quickly ran over to him and picked him up, carrying him to the medical bay of the station. As the next few weeks came to pass, Luke would be given a mechanical prosthetic hand. Thrawn would see that the young Admiral Skywalker got all the care he needed to make a full recovery. After this, Thrawn would take the title of Emperor, ensuring the power vacuum of the Empire did not cause chaos and infighting. He would blame the eclipse malfunction on Director Krennic, who would be executed for his accused crimes. Luke would be given a new rank, that of High Grand Admiral. He sat at the right hand of Thrawn, being in second command. The Galactic Empire would continue to rule the galaxy for decades to come. The floundering rebellion would eventually fall, and the might and insight that came with Thrawn's leadership and the Imperial Senate would be reinstituted, though Thrawn and Luke still only had the true power in the galaxy. Kenobi and Yoda would live out their lives on Dagobah, unknowing the fate that befell upon Leia, Vader, Palpatine, and the others. They would die naturally as the last Jedi to ever live. With this, the Sith were vanquished from existence in the galaxy, with the only true power being that of Thrawn, Luke, and the Galactic Empire. That is, for the time being. And that is our story. Again, special thanks to George Story, Benjamin Wells, Jay Hoffman, Warping It Through, Icy Raptor, Gort, and Chancellor Sanders for supporting the channel. Let's hit 1,000 likes on this so we can see what if Count Dooku turned Obi-Wan to the dark side in Attack of the Clones. Or if you want to see what if, let me know down below. If you want to come some crossovers, check out the Twitch community, Discord, and Patreon if you want to see me and be a part of the community in other ways. Anyways, this story I think is really cool. I think Cameron has a really cool setup here, and I really enjoy this. I think this is a great story. It's a lot of fun, and when you have both the twins separated, you have a lot of extra creative freedom, and it has a lot of character for you to divvy up the story, right? You can have side plots going on, and you have a lot going on in the story itself. And I think Cameron takes full advantage of that. We've done that before with the Leia being trained by Vader and Luke being trained by Vader, both of which are longer videos as well, and both of which have a lot of side plots, a lot of this going on here and this going on here. And I think having Luke join the Imperial Navy, I think he would have excelled. I think he's completely on point with this. I think Cameron nails the nail on the head, or hammers the nail on the head, or however the expression goes. And I think he really understands that Luke would excel, just like Anakin would. He would excel. I mean, any one of the Skywalker children would have excelled, and I think that would have been the case here. And I think Cameron did a great job of taking advantage of the events of Star Wars Rebels. And I mean, it's such a great show, so underrated, and I think he takes a great advantage from using the show and using different concepts from the show and kind of telling that story forward. And even killing Zeb in the story, I think that was brilliant, because it allows Agent Kallus to be on the Imperial team for the duration of the story, not interfere with the Rebels, or the Empire, sorry. And I think this story excels because it doesn't focus on the Force aspect of Vader being like, oh wait, I can train my son. It's like, no, I'm gonna find out another way to do this, right? Kind of try and go behind the Emperor's back, and it works really well until it doesn't. And I like that Leia was able to like beat her father but not beat him, because let's be real, Vader's not gonna lose to Leia. But I think if she came in unsuspected, and I think she took advantage of her abilities, I think she would have. And It's because she wouldn't beat him with the dark side. Same way Luke wasn't able to beat Vader being on the light side. He was able to beat him by using the dark side, and therefore Leia doesn't ruin that. But I also think that, you know, Luke being loyal to the Empire is a deadly combination because I think if he excelled, and I think he really would have, I think he would have excelled greatly. I think he would have become fiercely loyal, and I don't think he would have had any reason to be like, well, I can go back to moisture farming. So I think the story was brilliant. I really enjoyed it. I hope you all enjoyed it as well. I hope you all enjoy what's coming up next. August is going to be a huge month for us, so subscribe. Get ready for the next giveaway. Anyways, I love you all. Spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.